at this exact same beach last year and it looked a whole lot different. It really was much worse in terms of the garbage and the pollution.
GraceKennedy Foundation is driving sustainable change through strategic initiatives that support GraceKennedy Foundation is driving sustainable change through strategic initiatives that support education, healthy lifestyles, and the environment. Here's a look at what we achieved in 2024. Through our education programs, we continue to nurture the next generation by providing scholarships, mentorship, and critical resources to help students thrive. Through the GK Campus Connect program, over 340 students benefited from our Making the A-Grade Health and Wellness seminar and the Financial Literacy series, preparing them for academic and personal success. This year, we awarded over $27 million in scholarships to 78 tertiary students, along with 15 laptops to support their academic journey.
This scholarship has greatly eased the financial burden on my family in funding my tertiary education, and it has allowed me to focus on what my real passion is, which is volunteering and building back our Jamaican community. And I just want to thank the GraceKennedy Foundation for allowing me this opportunity, and I'm really grateful to have been awarded this scholarship.
We continue to support our GK family, awarding bursaries to 22 children of GK staff for both high school and university. Our Birthright program reconnected Jamaican diaspora youth with their heritage through a summer internship, earning a 100% excellence rating. These initiatives not only improve the lives of our youth, but also strengthen GK's future, creating emotional connections with our brands, contributing to our talent pipeline, and providing meaningful support to GK employees and their families. GK focus on their education. On campus, over 5,000 students benefited from meal support, thanks to our partnerships with university entities.
My name is Najee Nelson. With being a benefactor of the food bank, I've been able to prepare meals for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. As before, I wasn't able to have dinner every night, or I would be going into classes hungry. And it has helped me, and it will help many others if you donate today.
These initiatives not only benefit our nation's youth, but also position GK as a trustworthy, caring brand, fostering long-term customer loyalty and growth. Environmental sustainability remains a core focus as we work towards a cleaner, healthier Jamaica. Through Earth 365, over 170 staff participated in beach cleanups, with 109 employees and their families joining our annual GK Foundation cleanup.
Today, it's not just GK staff, but it's GK staff and their families. So we have brought out families, and it is important for me that we have an environment that's around, 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now because of those children.
In 2024, we took major steps in restoring Kingston Harbour, installing a waste trapping barrier at Sandy Gully, launching the Great Mangrove Cleanup, training 12 environmental wardens, and preventing over 1 million kilograms of waste from entering the harbour. Sustainability isn't just a commitment, it strengthens GK's leadership in corporate responsibility, engages staff, and attracts a purpose-driven talent. As we look ahead to 2025, we remain committed to expanding our reach and deepening our impact. We'll focus on hosting Dr. Wendel Abel for our annual lecture, strengthening Making the A-Grade partnerships, and supporting 300 students monthly through the food bank. We'll also continue empowering students through financial literacy workshops, advancing Earth 365 with staff training, and expanding the Kingston Harbour Cleanup project with new waste trapping barriers. GKF is committed to creating lasting change in the classroom, in communities, and in our environment. Thank you for your unwavering support. Together, we're building a brighter, more sustainable future for Jamaica.
This one is really about the entire Kingston. We have the most beautiful harbour in the world, and we're going to be continuing to do this until the Kingston harbour is pristine and we can have cross the harbour races again.
One thing special about today is it's not just GK staff, but it's GK staff and their families. So we have brought our families, and it is important for me that we have an environment that's around, 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now because of those children.
We had over 330 volunteers come out today to clean up the beach, and it's really impressive to see. We collected a lot of garbage, and I have to give a big thank you to all our volunteers who came out today to ensure that this was possible.
We really need to play a better role in ensuring that we keep our environment safe, because a lot of persons just don't understand the impact when you don't store your garbage properly that it has on our environment. It impacts us, economically, and also just our health and our well-being.
So I always say that teaching children about environmental stewardship cannot start early enough. I'm a product of that. At my prep school, we had recycling, we had composting, and it's only after I left that I realized it wasn't a part of our society as a whole. And that made me very passionate about the environment and seeing these practices done countrywide.
I'm
happy to be here today celebrating the remarkable achievements of our 2024 GraceKennedy Foundation Scholarship recipients.
We believe in the power of education, and that's why we invest in it, and we believe that it is the single most important input in your life that will change the trajectory of your life.
To me, it doesn't matter where you come from, it's the values that you have that will make the difference. We are here to support you.
I'm extremely grateful to the GraceKennedy Foundation for not just allowing me, but also 77 other recipients to continue our studies at the various tertiary level institutions and to create leaders for the society at large.
Coming from Campion High School, going into college, it's a real financial burden for us. At first, we didn't expect she would be able to make it into college because we didn't have that financial strength. Her being the first one in the family going to college, we are very, very grateful and honored to receive the award.
This scholarship has greatly eased the financial burden on my family in funding my tertiary education, and it has allowed me to focus on what my real passion is, which is volunteering and building back our Jamaican community. And I just want to thank the GraceKennedy Foundation for allowing me this opportunity, and I'm really grateful to have been awarded this scholarship. I first heard about the GraceKennedy Scholarship when Mrs. Caroline Mafood came to Campion and told us about the amazing opportunities that GraceKennedy has to offer. And I encourage everyone to apply for a GraceKennedy Scholarship because not only are you given the funds to finance your tertiary education, you are also welcome to the GK family, and I am so excited to finally be a part of the GK family.
Scotiabank was at this exact same beach last year and it looked a whole lot different. It really was much worse in terms of the garbage and the pollution. I really have to applaud the work that the Kingston Harbour cleanup project is doing. It is working. The trash interceptors are working. There's much less garbage on the beach now. There's still a lot of garbage, but we can definitely see a difference between last year and this year.
We're here at the Great Mangrove Cleanup. I'm happy to support the initiative. The Kingston Cleanup project is a major undertaking, and the Great Mangrove Cleanup as a subset of it is critically important. Mangroves provide coastal protection and also help to capture carbon. Now, ultimately, we can't replace the services of mangroves, so ensuring that they're healthy is in all of our interests.
I'm here at the Great Mangrove Cleanup today, and it was a great day. Well, as you can see, we have already collected a lot of trash. We have already made about 3 trips already with waste to the offloading site. This shows you that people are concerned about the environment. So it was a great initiative.
I'm really very encouraged by what was achieved today. As you can see, a ton of garbage and plastic and fridges and car bumpers. All of this has come from the gullies in Kingston and washed right across here, across the harbour. So that in itself is a great success, that we've been able to clean up the legacy waste at 7 different sites across the harbour, which is going to give us a kind of baseline as to how the gully barriers, the interceptor barriers are going to make a difference. The other thing that I would say has been super successful is the energy and the support that we've had from corporate Jamaica and from the volunteers that came out and gave their all. It's hot, it's exhausting, it's hard work, and they did it with a smile, and I just want to thank everybody for their support.
I went to Holy Trinity High School. Before that, I went to St. George's. I basically grew up in downtown, barefoot and bare things. But I found art, and I really wanted it to be my escape out of my community. I was a bit shy to ask for it, but COVID came around, and
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the national anthem. Her Excellency, the Most Honorable Lady Allen, representing His Excellency, Sir Patrick Allen, Governor General of Jamaica. Dr. Fred Kennedy, Chairman, Grace Kennedy Foundation and Mrs. Kennedy. Professor the Honorable Wendel Abel, Consultant Psychiatrist at the University of the West Indies and the 2025 Lecturer. The Honorable Douglas Orain, Retired Chairman and CEO, Grace Kennedy. Apologies from our Group CEO, Frank James, who is not able to join us in person, but has sent a message that will be played shortly. Members of the Board of Directors of Grace Kennedy Limited. Members of Grace Kennedy's Executive Management Team and other senior management, Gail Solomon, General Counsel and Chief Corporate Secretary, Grace Burnett, CEO, Grace Kennedy Financial Group, and Stephen Whittingham, Deputy CEO, Grace Kennedy Financial Group. Andrew Misado, Chief Financial Officer, Grace Kennedy Limited. Members of the Board of Directors of the Grace Kennedy Foundation. Professor Elsa Leorini, former chair of the foundation, who is joining us online. Professor Dale Weber, former principal and pro-vice chancellor at the University of the West Indies, Mona, former holder of the James S. Solomon Senior Chair in the Environment, and currently Jamaica's Special Envoy for Climate Change and the Environment. The Grace Kennedy Foundation funded James Solomon Senior Chair in the Environment, Professor Mona Weber. Former Grace Kennedy lecturers, members of the Grace Kennedy family, members of the media, distinguished guests, colleagues, students, friends. Welcome to the 2025 Grace Kennedy Foundation Annual Lecture. It is truly an honor to have you here with us, both in person and online, as we gather for an evening of insight, reflection, and most importantly, the action to follow. We are pleased to have our sign language interpreters, Abraham Aiken and Danae Campbell, present with us this evening, providing live interpretation for all attendees. Since 1989, the Grace Kennedy Foundation has been committed to fostering national conversations on issues of great significance, and this year is no exception. Tonight, we confront a subject that touches countless lives, childhood trauma, and the urgent need to break its cycle. Our distinguished speaker this evening is Professor the Honorable Wendel Abel, OD, OJ, JP, a leading voice in mental health and community wellness. Through his research, advocacy, and public service, he has shaped policies and deepened our understanding of mental health issues in Jamaica and beyond. Professor Abel will take us on a journey, examining the profound effects of childhood trauma on emotional, cognitive, and social development, and crucially, the steps we must take as a society to foster healing. As we begin this important discussion, I encourage you to listen, reflect, and think about how each of us can play a role in changing the outcomes for our children and our communities. Now, to officially welcome us, I invite to the podium Dr. Fred Kennedy, the chairman of the GraceKennedy Foundation.
Thank you very much. It's my honor to welcome you all here tonight. I was, to all the distinguished and honored guests, I was asked to say all protocols observed. It's a long, long, long list. But I'd like to welcome you all here, and also all those who are online as well. They are live streaming on GraceKennedy YouTube channel. So 1989, as it was mentioned, it marked the inaugural year of the GraceKennedy Foundation public lectures. And that was presented by no other than G. Arthur Brown. For those of you who are old enough to remember, he was then the governor of the Bank of Jamaica. And his topic back then was patterns of development and attendant choices and consequences for Jamaica and the Caribbean. So over the years, we've had persons of distinction to lecture on subjects of political, economic, and social concern to Jamaica and the Caribbean. And this evening, as was mentioned, we welcome the Honorable Wendel Dwight Abel, ODE OJ, Professor of Mental Health Policy at the University of the West Indies. I had a conversation with Dr. Abel prior to coming this evening, and I couldn't get over what an unassuming gentleman he was, but highly, highly knowledgeable and skilled in his field, both in practice and in theory. In reading Professor Abel's work, I couldn't help but think about my experiences when I was, for those of you who didn't know, but I was principal of St. George's College. It's a while back now, it's 20 years. And when I mention St. George's College, I always think of North Street, and I always think of Kingston College. And if there are any KC old boys here, I congratulate you on your championship. Are there any KC old boys here? Must be some. I know there's some Woolmerians here, for sure. A lot of Woolmerians. But anyway, at St. George's College, every month we would invite someone of note, usually a past student or an old boy, to speak to the boys. And on this one occasion that I remember, it's a long time now, it's 2005, we asked Father Michael Lewis, who was then the priest at Stella Maris. And he came, and he was the main celebrant at the cathedral. There were 1,500 boys out there in front of him, and he was visibly shaken, I remember, and the pace of his voice accelerated, and as he told the story of a recent trauma that he had had, and it had to do with him witnessing the shooting of an elderly lady who had come in that Saturday or that Sunday to clean the pews of the church. And it was somebody that he knew very well. And he had, I guess, was told the story of how he tried to save her life by taking in her car to the hospital, and she did not make it. She died before they got to the hospital. But I remember what he did then was he paused and he looked above the heads of those 1,500 boys and he said to them, he said, how many of you out there have experienced in your lives and in your communities an incidence of violent crime? And I want to tell you, at least half, 700 hands went up like that, high in the air in the cathedral that day. But what Father Lewis did not know is that he really had unlocked the secrecy and the silence of a lot of the burden that those boys were keeping. And for weeks after that, we had guidance counselors on hand to hear out some of the stories that these boys were divulging of their traumas. St. George's College still is and was then very much of an inner city school, and a lot of the boys came from the South End and from central Kingston. But schools, you know, are a lifeline for a lot of young people in Jamaica, and they fulfill a very important function in terms of the kinds of difficulties that they face in their homes. The statistics are staggering. As many as 8 out of every 10 young people in Jamaica are affected by adverse childhood experiences, and so pervasive that we are plagued by what Professor Abel calls a culture of violence in Jamaica. Professor Abel's work speaks to the critical need for awareness and action. I want to say a few words about the GraceKennedy Foundation, because we do good work, and this is an example of the kinds of outreach that we have. The activities of the GraceKennedy Foundation, from its inception, have been aligned with the strategic vision of our parent company. It was the brainchild of Mr. Carlton Alexander. Two of his sons are here. In 1982, which marked the 60th anniversary of GraceKennedy. Those were optimistic times for Jamaica, and well, for private enterprise anyway. I won't get into the politics too much, but there was an upbeat in terms of, and a recovery in terms of private enterprise. So it was the right time to start new ventures, and the GraceKennedy Foundation was certainly one of those. Carlton's vision was that the foundation would participate in and support national projects aimed at improvements in social and welfare conditions, and those that were synonymous with GraceKennedy's goals. And I think that is significant. And then Prime Minister, the Honorable Edward Seaga, and the leader of the opposition at the time, the Honorable Michael Manley, praised GraceKennedy for what they called then its corporate citizenship. And the chief reason, in their words, quote, was that it has achieved such a unique stature and recognition. It is because of this that they have achieved such a unique stature and recognition as a company in Jamaica and in the world. We have evolved, and I don't say this modestly, but we have evolved into a world-class corporate foundation over a period of 43 years. In fulfilling a mission of We Care, we have increased the foundation's impact, and we're beginning to measure this impact that we're having on the economic and social well-being of Jamaicans by investing in sustainable projects in education, in the environment, and in health. In education, we continue to offer public lectures like this. We fund endowed chairs. Some of them are here. Professor Mona Weber is here. I see her. We've endowed chairs at the University of West Indies. We fund projects to support early childhood education and special needs students. We fund 90 tertiary scholarships annually. And in the environment, we have facilitated the implementation of Kingston Harbour Cleanup Project with the NGO, the Ocean Cleanup, which is investing millions of US dollars to prevent solid waste flowing into Kingston Harbour. And I think to date, if I'm not wrong, the measurement is somewhere in the region of 3,000 metric tons of garbage and plastics that have been taken out of Kingston Harbour. Without wanting to be too political, I just want to say that in this time of global instability, I think the role of civil society is especially critical. It's critical in terms of Jamaica's national development. NGOs, there are over 30 local Jamaican foundations like ours. They support marginalized sectors in society, and they contribute significantly to sustainable development. They play a very important role, along with private enterprise and the government, in achieving the vision of what Jamaica wants to be a developed country status by the year 2030. We play a critical role in helping Jamaica achieve that vision. Important also, I believe, in these times, the public lecture series promotes the value of free speech and thought leadership, which are right now under attack in the free world. They are core pillars upholding the development of a democratic society, fostering public debate, critical thinking, and informed decision-making. Those things are precious to a democracy, as we are finding out right now. So let us reflect this evening on the personal collective roles that we each can play in addressing childhood trauma in our communities. Occurrences of childhood trauma, depression, addiction, other mental health conditions are widespread in Jamaica, and only through continued education and action can we hope to break the cycle. Welcome again, Professor Abel. We are really grateful for you to share your expertise tonight, and which will no doubt enhance our commitment to mental health advocacy. And we thank you, each of you, for joining us this evening, for caring and for engaging in dialogue to find ways to break the cycle of childhood trauma. Thank you very much.
Thank you for bringing such a warm welcome, Dr. Kennedy. Now, as you may know, Mr. Frank James, former CEO of GraceKennedy Foods Domestic Division, was recently appointed Group CEO of GraceKennedy Limited. Regrettably, he is unable to join us this evening due to previous commitments, but he has recorded a message to share his thoughts and express his support for this important lecture. His appreciation for the work of the GraceKennedy Foundation and his commitment to addressing critical societal issues like childhood trauma are unwavering. So without further delay, let us turn to the screen for his message.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 35th Annual GraceKennedy Foundation Lecture. I am truly sorry that I can't be there with you in person tonight, but I'm very excited that you're all here for what promises to be a truly impactful discussion. A huge thank you to Professor Abel for accepting our GK Foundation's invitation to be this year's distinguished lecturer. We've been looking forward to this conversation, especially because Professor Abel is bringing his own childhood experiences into the discussion. I know that personal perspective will make his insights even more powerful. Too many children in Jamaica face serious trauma and adversity. That's why it is so important for us to talk about its impact and how we can help our children heal. When we address childhood trauma, we're not just helping individual children, we're building strong families, communities, and a better future for all of us. At GraceKennedy, we are deeply committed to being part of the solution. Through our Grace and Staff Community Development Foundation, we offer free counseling services in the communities we serve across Jamaica. We also recognize that our team and their families may sometimes also need support, which is why we provide free counseling for them as well. We are grateful to have experts like Dr. Curtis Sweeney and Soshina White on our team, making sure these essential services are available. I encourage you all to fully engage with Professor Abel's lecture. Ask questions, challenge ideas, and think about how you can play a role in breaking the cycle of childhood trauma, whether in your family, workplace, or community. Even small actions can make a big difference. Let's leave tonight with a renewed sense of purpose and commitment. Together, we can create a safer, more supportive Jamaican society where every child has a real chance to thrive. Thank you, and I hope you have a meaningful and inspiring discussion.
Before we introduce our lecturer, I actually didn't introduce myself. I'm Julie Meeks-Gardner. I'm a director of the GraceKennedy Foundation. So before we introduce our lecturer, I'm going to share with you how the discussion session will be managed. There will be no live questions. On your digital program, you may click on the words "Submit your questions," which will take you to slido.com, where you can submit your questions, so you'll have to type it in. If you don't already have access to the digital program, please scan the QR code on the screen. And if you are my age or older, you may ask someone to help you with this process. After clicking on the link, you will be prompted to write and submit your questions, and they are going to come to me magically, and I will relay them to Professor Abel. Please note that all audience members can like your question, and the more likes it has, the higher up on the ladder it will be moved. So we may not be able to accommodate all of the questions, but we're going to cover as many as we can in the time available. YouTube viewers, you may also enter your questions through Slido. Okay, I'm now going to invite to the podium Dr. Carol Hordat-Gentles, Senior Lecturer in the School of Education from the University of the West Indies, Mona, and Chair of the GraceKennedy Foundation's Education Committee, to introduce our esteemed lecturer for this evening. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Carol Hordat-Gentles.
Good evening, everyone. I can't believe it, Prof. The moment is here. So it is my distinct pleasure and a great privilege to introduce our speaker for this year's GraceKennedy Foundation Annual Lecture, Professor the Honorable Wendel Abel, OD, OJ, JP. As we focus tonight on the topic of breaking the cycle of childhood trauma, we are mindful that paying close attention to ensuring the personal and collective mental and physical well-being of our children is vital for our society now and in the future. We are delighted to have Prof. Abel, as many of us affectionately call him, to help us understand the factors that contribute to childhood trauma and how we as adults can help to mitigate this very serious challenge to the well-being of Jamaica. Prof. Abel's professional and personal accomplishments make him supremely qualified to give this lecture. He is a professor of mental health policy in the Department of Community Health and Psychiatry in the Faculty of Medical Sciences at the University of the West Indies, and consultant psychiatrist at the University Hospital of the West Indies, Mona. His professional credentials include a Bachelor of Medicine and Surgery and an advanced diploma in psychiatry from the University of the West Indies, Mona, a Master of Public Health and Certificate in Addiction Studies from Johns Hopkins University, and a Doctor of Medicine from UWI Mona. As a leading Caribbean scholar, he has authored and co-authored over 100 academic papers, numerous newspaper articles, and case reports on mental health policy, depression, suicide and stigma, mental illness, clinical psychiatry, and psychotherapy. Professor Abel has been an important contributor to the crafting of formative mental health policies nationally and regionally. He has served as a consultant to the Government of Jamaica, the Pan American Health Organization, and CARICOM as an advisor in mental health. Professor Abel's outstanding efforts in raising public awareness about mental health issues, his advocacy and his activism for those suffering with mental illness have earned him national recognition. He received the Order of Distinction in 2007, an award from the Medical Foundation of Jamaica for his contribution to mental health and public education in 2013, the UWI Vice-Chancellor's Award for Community Service in 2018, an RJR Gleaner Award of Excellence in Health and Wellbeing 2018, and the icing on the cake, the Order of Jamaica in 2024. And I believe you are one of 5 or 6 persons who've been bestowed with that honor, am I correct? So that's quite a distinction. Prof. Abel is recognized not only for his professional achievements, but also for the pride and passion he has for contributing to Jamaica. In an interview with the Gleaner on the occasion of receiving the RJR Gleaner Award of Excellence, he shared, "My vision for this country that I love dearly is that it becomes a place that we are all proud of to live, to work, to retire, and certainly to enjoy excellent health, including mental health." He is known for being a man of humility, who describes his life's work above all else as an opportunity to make a difference in people's lives. We are so excited and honored to have him here to deliver the 2025 Grace Kennedy Foundation Lecture. Please join me in welcoming Professor the Honorable Wendel Abel, OD, OJ, JP, to the stage.
Not an easy road, and many see the glamour and the glitter, so them think I better rose. Me say, who feels he knows? Whoa, 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 whoa.
Good evening,
Lord,
everyone.
help me
I have some notes here, but they're missing. Anyway, thank you. Don't worry, I wasn't traumatized. But good evening, everyone. It is indeed my greatest pleasure to be with you here this evening. Let me pause to thank Grace Kennedy Foundation for this opportunity to share my thoughts and experiences on this topic, breaking the cycle childhood trauma. I extend my special thanks to Caroline Mahfoud, CEO of the Grace Kennedy Foundation, and the team members for the great skills that they demonstrated in organizing this event. Give them a hand. It was a lot of work, but not traumatic. Special thanks to Dr. Charmaine Mackenzie. Where's Charmaine? The editor of the book we have produced. Charmaine, boy, it's been a long journey. Thanks for the long hours and your perseverance, the many corrections to get this book ready. And I encourage everyone, kindly read it. It's online and it's free. This evening, my aim is to spark curiosity, explore ideas, ask questions, encourage meaningful discussions, and we're open to disagreement. We live in a world where many persons who have experienced trauma have been shamed and silenced into secrecy and pain. This evening offers us a unique opportunity to lift this veil of secrecy, silence, and shame. I'm a psychiatrist, and psychiatrists deal with pain and hope. Some people think that otherwise. This evening, some content that we will share may make us uncomfortable. Please remember to take care of self. This may require seeking professional help. And I know many of you are experts in the field, others are new to it or curious about it. I trust my insights resonate with you, provide value, and leave you inspired to explore further. Thank you all. Those in the room and those online, thank you for joining. And there's silence. And I'm going to start with a story. Psychiatrists like to tell story, you know. In fact, they say of us that, well, let me not make the joke now. I'll probably leave it later. But I'll start the story about this 6-year-old young man, a little boy. And at 6, it was one night, he got the news that his mother died suddenly. Poor child, question in his mind, how could this be? Even question God, how could you let this happen to me? And of course, it impacted on him. It was his first year in elementary school, and his teacher brought him closer to her because she realized that he was acting out a little bit, you know. Thanks for that loving care of a teacher. That child happens to be me. And I hear, yes. And I tell you this, it was a traumatic journey. Because in those days, about 60 years ago, now you've worked out my age, right? So about 60, I said about, it's about 60 years ago. With Jamaica only had probably what, 1 or 2 psychiatrists. We had no psychologists, so there was no talk about therapy and all of those great things. And it was for, had it not been for extended family, a caring father, and that teacher in my elementary school who is still alive, I would probably not be here today. And so I just want to be grateful for the persons, the many persons who've been in my life. And so some of you are saying, I see why you have chosen this topic. Because, you know, they often talk about the wounded healer. And I see a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists here and people who are not in mental health. And everybody's trying to make the diagnosis. Well, as we go along, you probably might have some clarity, right? But so when I shared with well, before I get to that, let me address the first question here. What is trauma? Because that's what we're going to be talking about. And trauma occurs when individuals are exposed to events that are distressing, potentially life-threatening, events that can overwhelm our ability to cope. And often these experiences we witness them, we may witness them, we may be involved in them directly or even told about it. And I'll pause on that because we can be traumatized by being told about incidents. And that is why it's important in today's world that, you know, when events occur in communities, we don't drag people together and have them debrief. We don't do debriefing anymore because debriefing actually traumatizes people. And that is why media has to handle sensitive information a little bit more, because very often, a lot of people in fact will tell you they don't watch television in Jamaica or listen to radio because the content is too traumatizing for them. And it's because people become traumatized. They become vicariously traumatized just by listening to conversations and seeing the blood. And you know, if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead in media, right? And that is something we have to pay attention to. But why childhood trauma? I've decided to focus on childhood trauma because children are vulnerable, very vulnerable. And the reality is that not every child who is exposed to trauma will have problems. But the reality also is that trauma may affect their life trajectory from the womb to the tomb. And that is why it's so important for us to have this discussion. Now, I just want to make clarify something here, because in the literature, there are so many words that are used to describe trauma. It actually gets you, it can make you traumatic just reading the literature, right? There's adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, which we'll talk about, childhood adversity, early adversity, trauma, childhood stressors, child maltreatment, childhood harm. So forgive me if you find that I'm jumping using all of these terms this evening. They mean all the same, more or less. So I told a good friend of mine who is in this room, and I said, you know, I'm going to talk about childhood trauma. And she said to me, why childhood trauma? What do you know about childhood trauma? And I thought about it, and as to why I actually chose to do this topic. And I want you to join me on this journey. It started out when I was being trained as a psychiatrist, and at the time I was placed at the Comprehensive Health Center, and I was at that time being mentored by Dr. Pauline Milburn, who is here. Dr. Milburn, could you stand? Because I'm dedicating this lecture to you. But Dr. Milburn, I refer to as a mother of child psychiatry in Jamaica. So she ran this clinic many years at the Comprehensive Health Center and taught many of us, generations of us. And while working with her, I would see children who were irritable, children always fighting, children cutting themselves sometimes, children stealing, lying. And we would make diagnoses like conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, even attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I'm sure that diagnosis is going to be increased very soon, because I noticed the drug that is actually used to treat it, Concerta, is now covered under the National Health Fund. And I notice a lot of my colleagues are here, and sometimes I speak out a term. Please do not overdiagnose this condition when these children come. Just follow the discussion, and somebody is saying, yeah, of course, it's true. Right? So we're seeing these children, and when you look into their history, there were problems in the family, yes, there were social problems, and we would, yes, identify these were contributory, but it wasn't clear because the diagnosis just couldn't fit, you know? I thought this couldn't all be attention deficit disorder, couldn't all be conduct disorder. And then I was placed in St. Ann's Bay to work for a psychiatrist in the Northeast region. And when I was there, I was swamped with a lot of children who were referred from the school system. And it's because I was working closely with a teacher at the time. She was a teacher, special educator, now a psychologist, Dr. Orlean Brown, and I see Orlean here, right? And Orlean, she commented one day, she saw me one day crawling under the barbed wire fence, right, to get to the schoolroom, right? And I was telling her, look here, there are many children we're seeing, and something is happening here. But there were children not learning, children daydreaming in class, children not paying attention, children again who were hyperactive, restless in class. And again, the diagnosis that we had was the conduct disorder, the attention deficit disorder, oppositional defiant disorder. Yes, they were having problems at home, there were social problems. And then many years later, I started to work with a hard-working lady, Audrey Budai. Audrey is also here. You know, all my fan club, they're here with me this evening, right? Audrey, thanks for coming. Audrey used, at the time, work with the Child Development Agency. And that is where I would see children in state care, children who were running away, children who were involved with older adults, children who were being shifted from one family to another. And some of the stories are painful. I see some of those children this evening. I remember one evening I was called out to see a child, and I'm kind of distorting the story so that we can't make any connection. But I was called out to see this particular patient, and when I went, the blood was dripping, red blood dripping on the floor. And it was that she had cut herself. And when I asked, it was that she got news that the person who she lived with was murdered. And they cut her head, tied it in an ackee tree, and 2 fingers were cut and stuck in the mouth. And when you heard the story, this was a young person who was sexually abused by family, stepfather, 3 young men in the family, and sometimes the individual was actually sent out in the community to have sex at a very young age. And these were the stories. I know they're painful and the room is silent, and I'm sorry. And I'm probably dissociating, and I'll tell you what that is. Dissociation is when you get painful stories, you actually you actually leave your body. Yes? That's what happens to people sometimes when they're dissociating. And that is why you may be walking and you happen upon a somebody, or you think the person might be there to rob you, right? And you freeze. And what it is sometimes, that freezing is sometimes we dissociate and we just, when we sense danger, we dissociate and we just leave our body behind. Yes? There could be more graphic examples I give, but I won't do it. But I also remember the story of a young man. And I saw him and I said to him, he showed me his toe. He's kicked off his shoes and said, look at this. And when I looked, his toenails were missing. And I said, what happened? And he said that he was in foster care and the foster mother took pliers and pulled out the toenails. Yes, these are the stories. I don't know how Dr. Milburn and others, and Audrey Budai and Arlene, Dr. Brown, continue to work with these clients on a daily basis. You know, and Dr. Milburn, I always admire your calm, how you've been able to just manage under those difficult circumstances. But these are the cases that we see on a daily basis. And of course, as an adult practicing psychiatrist, the many nights you're called out for the persons who have attempted suicide, or persons who suffering from depression, people who use substances, and of course it goes back to their past. And so over the years, the question would be repeated in my head, what's wrong with that child or those children or those adults? Because the textbook weren't giving a clear picture. And this is how the thoughts were in my head. Keep going up and down from night to night until I had my light bulb moment. What's that moment? It was when this study was put out, a study on adverse childhood experiences, ACEs study. At the time it was actually done in 1998, the first large study on ACEs in the USA. They questioned over 17,000 adults, asked questions about early trauma. And the questions that were asked had to do with 10 categories of trauma. In purple you see here, abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, 3. Physical neglect, emotional neglect, 2. And in green are experiences within the household, like domestic violence, loss of a parent, as was my situation, drugs and alcohol use, mental health issues in the household, and household member being incarcerated. And the study, the results were astounding. They found that ACEs are common, that's your adverse childhood experiences. And they found that 2 out of every 3 persons had at least one ACE. 2/3, 2 out of every 3. I was going to ask you to look in front, look behind, look to your left or right, but let me not do that, yes? But it also showed that 1 in 6 persons who answered had reported 4 or more ACEs. But what the study also showed is that these adverse childhood experiences were linked to 5 of the 10 leading causes of death globally. And what is also interesting in terms of the findings from this study is that if you have, the more ACEs you have, the more likely you are to die earlier. With 6 or more ACEs, persons actually had premature mortality, meaning that they will die 20 years earlier. So we die, if our trauma is not dealt with, we die early. And what the study also showed is that 4 more ACEs were associated, well, I think I mentioned that, higher rates of stroke, heart disease, diabetes, lung diseases, and many more. And I'm showing this slide on Jamaica. It's a 2021 leading causes of death. Couldn't get a more updated one, so I actually, the one that you're seeing in black is actually the one on COVID, because COVID was actually the 3rd cause of death in 2021. But you see the causes: stroke, diabetes, ischemic heart disease, violence at number 5, and hypertensive heart disease. And the reason I'm actually highlighting this is that you realize the leading causes of death here in Jamaica are similar to what we're seeing globally, and we realize the connection with these conditions. And adverse childhood experiences. And we'll come back to that because obviously we need to be studying more, we need to be looking more at the situation as it is in Jamaica and recognize that trauma contributes or is linked to many health conditions. What is also interesting in this study is that as the number of ACEs increases, so does the risk for health outcomes. It goes zoop, right? 1 ACE, 2 ACEs, 3 ACEs, 4 ACEs, the risk is increased. And I think I showed you that. So for example, if you have 4 more ACEs, the risk is doubled for stroke, diabetes, heart disease. And with 4 more ACEs, 15 times the risk of committing violence. And I think Mr. Kennedy shared with us the reality in the inner city communities and schools in Jamaica with the high level of exposure that is actually reported by young people. Let's look at the link with mental health problems. If you have 4 more ACEs, it increases the risk of suicide by 12. And we know that because when people present to us in an emergency room and we ask, tell us, what are the factors that may be contributing to your thinking about suicide or attempting and so on? Invariably it takes you back to childhood trauma. The risk for alcohol, 7 times, depression 5 times. And of course, ACEs are also linked to post-traumatic stress disorder and conditions such as anxiety. So this study, the 1998 study, at the time when the data was presented, it was groundbreaking. It highlighted the link with health problems, and we realized that we were living in silence, secrecy, and shame, pain. We weren't talking about trauma. But the study changed the narrative. And in changing it, we started to talk more about trauma. People started to research it more. We started to develop our system so that we can better deal with trauma. But of course, like any good study, the ACEs study has several limitations. It didn't account for all causes of trauma because there were, how many did I mention, if you're following me? 10, yes? And you know there are many more causes, and we'll come to that. And not enough was actually done in terms of mental health. And the study, well, it wasn't their intention to establish any causation because it was a study in which they were looking back in data. It was called a retrospective study. And as I said before, it was focusing on the original 10. Now, today, we have expanded our list of ACEs, and that's why we move away from the adverse childhood experiences, because that study kind of locked us into the 10, right? And that's why I've chosen the topic childhood trauma, because it reflects that we're looking at a more expanded list of ACEs. And there are many frameworks that we have used. The one I like is that they talk about the 4 realms of ACEs, where they look at the tree, and it would be the adverse community environment. Adverse community environment would be the soil and the roots, like violence in the community and that sort of thing. Adverse climate events would be the storm cloud ahead, and I see our our climate envoy here. You know very well, nowadays we're talking about bioclimatic events and climate change and how it affects especially small island developing states. We know the frequency of hurricanes and other disasters that we're being exposed to. And these, in fact, are traumatic, not only for the entire population, but also for children. And of course, adverse cultural experiences, the groundwater, that is there, just underground. We don't see it, we don't talk about it. These would be historical events like enslavement and so on, and I'll come to that in a little bit. Another way you could look at the expanded list of ACEs is those that are individual, family-based, school-based, community, and so on. But I want to go into all of that because some of it will come out in the discussion. But I want to touch on intergenerational or generational trauma. And this refers to the passing down of traumatic stressors or experiences, right, from one offspring to another. So what we're now recognizing is that a grandparent could have been exposed to trauma, and it's passed down to parents and the grandchildren, and they can pass it on to future offspring. And a lot of work has been done in this area. There's also a closely related topic, which is historical trauma, such as war, the pandemic. I don't think we have really fully explored the pandemic. I see you're shaking your head, but let me tell you something. Every day, those of us in mental health and other areas of life have to deal with the pandemic, and the pandemic has been very traumatic for children, yes? And the thing about children is that when they're experiencing trauma, they don't talk. But we must be mindful of that reality. But the war, the pandemic, natural disasters, enslavement, these are collective trauma, traumatic events that affect many persons, and not only many persons at one time, but several generations all at once. We all have been affected by the pandemic. Nobody has been spared, yes? And we hold these traumatic memories in what we call a collective memory, all of us, right? And from day on, day out, every day, we experience the ongoing reconstruction of trauma. And this historical traumatic exposure can be passed on from one generation to another. And I will further build on this as I go through the discussion. But having said all of that, right? What about Jamaica? What about childhood trauma in Jamaica? Unfortunately, we don't have any comprehensive study on ACEs. So we don't have one of those broad-based study looking at all the ACEs as those fancy studies they've done elsewhere. But we've done a number of studies in terms of looking at exposure to isolated ACEs. Much of it, as you would imagine, would be on violence, because this is a major problem in Jamaica and also in substance abuse. And I'm going to take you to this lovely report that came out in 2023, Jamaica Violence Against Children and Youth Survey in 2023. And because it's one of the most recent data we have, I've borrowed a lot from it just to kind of paint a picture of the landscape in Jamaica in terms of trauma and especially violence. What this study shows is that 8 out of 10 youth, because it was a study looking at young people in Jamaica, reported violence in home or community. So Mr. Kennedy, it's not surprising what you reported to us in terms of the experience at St. George's College. 8 out of 10 young people, report having experienced violence in their home or community. Which would mean then 8 out of 10 youth would have been exposed to at least one ACE, right? Violence being the most common. In terms of sexual trauma, it shows that looking at children in the age group 13 to 14, 1 in 4 females actually reported sexual trauma, 1 in 10 males sexual trauma. Bullying at school, 2 out of 3 children reported bullying. And somebody said, and I was thinking about bullying because when I was growing up, it wasn't a term we used a lot. You'd go home and say, oh, somebody has teased me. And sometimes a parent would say, don't worry, just ignore it, right? But it's a major problem, yes? And it is a major problem in our schools, yes? I remember from a prominent high school, a young man was brought to me. And he was a bright student, did very well in his PEP exam? Yes, passing on extra pressure, right? And it's for the entire family, parents and everybody. 20 minutes, thank you. I want to be on time. So the thing, so he was doing very well in school, and then they started to tease him at school. And it got to the point where he was starting to act out, and we'll explore why he did. But what happened is that he was brought to me, and I remember saying to the guidance counselor, don't you realize that this young man is being bullied? Nobody picked it up. They didn't realize it was really trauma. Yes? And I say this to say that trauma occurs and sometimes we don't recognize it's trauma. This is an interesting study, physical abuse among university students, which we did some years ago. And almost 2 out of 3 reported physical abuse. But what was interesting is that only 1 out of 4 recognized the experience as abuse. That's how it goes. It's life. In the interest of time, I'm going to just skip some of these. Youth considering attempting suicide, 1 in 10 youth in the age group 10 to 15 had serious consideration, and this is a study we did at university. And what we found was that the risk, one of the major risks, was actually being teased or bullied in school. So parents take it very seriously, bullying, yes? And what we found was a good protective factor was actually having a good relationship with parents. And I want to thank you, many parents who are just there for your children. You don't know how important it is and how protective it is. And I'm going to just skip a few here. I want to touch on this because the reports continue to remind us that 1 in 4 children live in poverty in Jamaica. And I just want to pause to say, most people living in poverty don't abuse their children. But the associated factors, risk factors, factors that are associated with poverty actually increase the risk for abuse, such as a chaotic and high-stressed environment, right? And community factors, which were the disorganized, poor neighborhoods, the garrisons, which our politicians have created, right? And so on. And when we look at these, it's really not an easy road for our children. Having shared this thought, I want you to think about this. If you don't heal from what hurt you, then you will bleed on people who did not cut you. And that explains, that's very profound there, but explains the blood in this country. There are people who have not healed, and they're bleeding on all of us every day. And we have to deal with this. Of course, as a society, we have to look at the normative attitude towards violence, the popular culture, the music that encourages violence and abuse, the overexposure in media, and of course, the political culture. But these are frightening statistics as we think about our country, Jamaica, land we love. And of course, I take you back 300 years of collective trauma from enslavement, and some of us may say, oh, we keep going back to that. But associated with slavery was a lot of poverty and suffering and destruction of our families, yes? You think about it. Children were ripped from their mother's breast, right? Meals were taken away from their families. And a lot of these patterns of behavior continue, and we'll get into it in a little while. And of course, sexual abuse of women and children was rampant. This is an interesting book, and a book I recommend to everybody, In Miserable Slavery. I know it's going to sell after this, right? But it speaks of the brutality of slavery, right? And just take note of it. It's available. Right? There's also an interesting article we wrote some time ago looking at the psychological trauma of slavery, the Jamaican case study, and I see Professor Nye here from the reparation group here at the university. You'd be interested in this, right? But it's speaking to the psychological trauma associated with enslavement. Trauma decontextualizing a person looks like personality. In fact, Douglas O'Rain reminded me of the study by Professor Hicklin, which pointed out that 1 in 3 Jamaicans may be diagnosed with personality disorder. Trauma decontextualizing a family looks like family trait. And trauma decontextualizing people looks like culture. Think about that. So, having looked at this data, the reality is that trauma is common in Jamaica, and especially so, there's high level of exposure to our children. Just some years ago, the Gleaner in an editorial pointed out that the abuse of children is a public health issue, and we need to treat it as such. Now, having said that, how does trauma affect the brain, body or behavior? How does it affect education of children? How? You know, I think it's important for us to explore this. And to understand that we have to appreciate what is called the stress response. And in order to, before I look at that, I'm just going to forgive me, I'm going to give you a quick anatomy class, right? The brain we have here, yes? This part is the frontal lobe, it's a thinking part. You know, mine is big, that's why they asked me to do the lecture, because they expect me to think and deliver to you, right? Thinking brain, you'll never forget that. And that's the prefrontal cortex, and that's a thinking part of the brain. Let me go back a little bit. And then deep inside the brain, there's a part called the amygdala. It's easy to remember. It's the alarm, A for amygdala, A for alarm. Always struggle to pronounce that word, but it's the alarm system of the brain. And then there's a hippocampus. It's like the filing cabinet. It stores it's a memory. It stores our memories and emotions and so on. And this understanding that will help us to understand how stress works. And so I talk about the stress response. So imagine one night you're walking in the park and you see a pit bull. We all are afraid of pit bull. And the alarm system goes off. That's the amygdala that says, it's a pit bull, dangerous. He's bitten many persons. And it's preparing you to do what? Flight, fight, or you can freeze. Just get out of your body. But the hippocampus comes in and say, but this is not a real trigger, you know. And the prefrontal cortex, which is thinking, what would it say to you? The dog is chained and the owner is nearby, so you're safe, you're quiet. So instead of running, you just sigh and you calm down. And that's the normal stress response that protects us. During that process, of course, the body produces a lot of cortisol, the stress hormone. But what if that pit bull comes home every night into your bedroom? And that's called toxic stress. That's what childhood trauma is about. Prolonged, repeated stress. Day in, day out, night after night, children are exposed to prolonged, repeated stress. And what it does is causes overactivation of their stress response. So the cortisol that is produced becomes poisonous, toxic to the brain and the body. I'll skip some of that. And, you know, they've done images showing what stress does to the brain, and you can see the difference there. I won't go into that. What this is telling us is that our brains are wired for connection. Trauma rewires the brain for protection. And that's why healthy relationships are difficult for wounded people. So, toxic stress, how does it affect early development? Can cause growth delay, problems with attention, learning, memory, low academic performance. Because of the problem with the prefrontal cortex, you have problems controlling your impulses, behavior, emotions. And therefore, I take you back to those children, or this child. These children who are irritable. They're irritable because they're what? Not regulated. The alarm system is constantly off, yes? Child who won't sit still in class may be hypervigilant, always expecting danger. This child who is not sleeping, hypervigilant, always fighting, has poor impulse control because the prefrontal cortex is actually not working well. The child who is daydreaming, not listening, may actually be dissociating, thinking about trauma, and has just left his body in the classroom. And you know what the teacher would do? Take a strap and just hit the child, yes? The days before corporal punishment was banned, yes? And that would also be what? Further re-traumatizing to the child. So these children, they were not bad. I hate to use the word, nor were they mad, right? They're actually sad children, right? Responding to chronic, to toxic stress. And so going forth, let us not ask what is wrong with this child, but what? What has what? Happened to that. I want everybody to repeat that. What has what? Happened to that child. Let's change the discourse. Because behavior is a language of trauma. Children will show you before they tell you they are in distress. Right? That's what we were seeing in the clinic. That's what we're seeing in the classroom. That's what we're seeing in the children in state care. They're seeing their behavior as a result of trauma. Apart from that, we know that toxic stress can lead to self-harming behavior, alcohol, substance abuse, aggression, violence, risky sexual behavior, poor parenting, problem with relationships, and also the propagation of intergenerational trauma. Mental disorders, I've dealt with that. I don't need to go through that. And of course, just to explain quickly the relationship between toxic stress and physical health. Because how is it trauma? How can it contribute to heart disease and other conditions? And it's because of the hormonal changes. I spoke about the cortisol, yes, being produced in excessive amount. The inflammatory changes in the body and immunological changes in the body, all related to the toxic stress.
Hi everyone, I am Marsha Grove, and today I will be sharing about my experiences as a child, having gone through childhood trauma. Now, I grew up in rural Jamaica, St. James, Montego Bay, and very rural. I mean, we had no running water, we had no electricity, no bathroom facilities. So I grew up under impoverished circumstances. I ended up also being abused physically by my mother and verbally, and sexually by my stepfather and persons in my community. What did this do to me? It caused me to be an individual who had no self-esteem, very low self-esteem. I mean, hygienic problems. I suffered with odor issues and not having basic amenities like roll-on and perfume and those things. Now, going to school, this affected me because I was bullied. I was, called the stinky girl and all of that. So it came out in my behavior. I started fighting, quarreling with everybody. I suffered inferiority issues. I was always trying to fit in but not able to because of my situation. Now, I believed I had no one who would have listened or cared for me. But eventually my guidance counselor, who saw potential in me and also saw the trauma that I was going through, assisted. And so she counseled me, she questioned me, and of course a whole can of worm was open because what was happening to me, the abuse, the physical, the sexual abuse, I suppressed it and really didn't want to speak to anybody about it. But what she did was she helped me to open up, and so I was able to get some help. Now, getting help was not very accessible because those times in the 80s we didn't have the resources that we now have, and the entities like the CDA or the SISOCA branches. What we had was just the police, who I believe they were not fully sensitized of the kind of help that we should have get. However, I was able to reach out to the Women's Crisis Center or the Women Inc. and gotten a few help at that time. Now, how did that impact me as a teenager into adulthood? I'll tell you more about that.
That's a client who decided to just share her story. But how she actually presented to us, yes, Livera, brave. She's breaking the silence. And I'll tell you this, some years ago, we used her at a workshop for guidance counselors. And she told me after the workshop, she was actually surprised. So many guidance counselors came to her crying and said, that was my experience. Wounded healers. It's a lot of trauma in the society. Let me take us to another topic. And the lights are off. You can turn it on. Wasn't intended to scare you, but I want to introduce this topic because it will explain to us how trauma can be passed on from one generation to another. It's about epigenetics. And it explains how genes are turned on and turned off. You'll never forget the night. Turning on, turning off, right? And it's the process by which our genetic message is actually changed. In that process, the sequence of genes not change. And in fact, the way I remember it is, you think about a keyboard. You go on it, the keys, the sequence not change, right? But you can type. I hope the lecture is not too long, but I'm told we have 10 minutes, right? You can change the sequence of words. You can change the genetic message, yes? And that's how epigenetic works, yes? And with what it tells us is that our trauma, our experience, our environment actually changes the gene expression. It's 3 E's. Experience, environment, expression, leading to behaviors and risk behavior, and of course that can be transferred across generation, because because what the trauma does is changes the genes. So a child who is exposed to a harsh community, the expression of their genes are actually changed. And it affects your attitude, behavior, cognition, health outcome, right? And this is very complex. I'll skip that one. There's also another one. This one is very interesting because it will tell us how to live longer, right? We have, the chromosomes carry our genes. And there's a telomere, which is like that little, think of the chromosome as a shoelace, yes? And the telomere is that little plastic cap, the protective cap at the end of the chromosome, and it protects it from fraying. It protects the chromosome. And the telomere can actually be shortened by trauma, yes, by aging. So that means we have to prevent our telomeres from what? Shortening, right? So I'll tell you how we can prevent that. And cancer, right? And I'll just throw this to you, and you catch it for me. Right? Sorry about that. But it tells you that the telomere can be passed from one person to another. That's a message, yes? And trauma shortens the telomere, yes? And it passes from one generation to another. And so studies have been done to show how trauma is transmitted to offspring. Mothers with ACEs, with trauma, pass their shortened telomeres to their offsprings. And these offsprings actually develop problems, behavioral problems later in life. So it's also the epigenetic effect on the what? Telomeres. Remember that shoelace that I threw, right? And this is what explains intergenerational transmission, how epigenetics and telomere shortening actually pass from one. We pass our trauma to our offsprings across generations. But since I promised you tell you about telomere, they're shortened by what? Aging. And so a lot of research is being done now to see how we can prevent that. And people argue things like, well, exercise, proper diet, antioxidants will prevent us from aging. Well, I know you all knew that, so that's not surprising. But you can read up. So let me skip this one. This is really just summarizing what we said, the trauma, toxic stress, how it affects brain development, it's hardwired into our biology, how it affects mental disorders, chronic disease, education, crime, and so on, right? And can be passed down. We bury our trauma and pain. We carry them in our brains and bodies, then pass them to another generation. Now, I'll just quickly tell you about the buffering effect. And you can imagine what is this. It's how do we buffer this toxic stress and prevent it from doing all of this damage to our brain or in our bodies and creating behavioral problems. All the studies that have been done show that positive relationships protect people, children, from toxic stress. Having an adult in your life who is able to provide a stable, secure, and safe relationship is protective. And it's 5 minutes, but I'm going to go about 10, yeah? And so we come now to how to break the cycle of trauma, yes? And can we use this knowledge to protect our children? This is the exciting part. How can we do that? We're not doomed. These children are not doomed. There's hope. There's hope. Trauma can be prevented more easily than it can be healed. Those of us who work, yes, know how difficult it is, right, to heal people from trauma. In fact, it's often said that the physical scars may heal, right? But the traumatic scars take a long, long time to heal, if ever at all. But what we know about effective interventions is that they're not quick, they're not cheap, and a lot of times they're long-term and intense. Yes? And there are different types of intervention, there are different levels, and the timing of intervention critical. And I'll tell you, the most effective interventions are those that involve screening, yes? And screening is relatively cheap. We should be screening our population, screening in schools, screening in our healthcare setting for persons with a history of trauma. Home visitation has also been shown to be very effective, positive parenting program, high quality childcare and early education, and of course, multi-component programs. And I'll quickly go through this. In terms of the timing of interventions, there are 3 windows of development in a child's life: 0 to 2, 9 to 4, 19 to 21. As the doctor right here, he likes to talk about the first 1,000 days, the time from conception to end of age 2. Remember, conception is about a year, that's how we get the first 1,000 days. But what the science tells us is that when children get a strong start, they get a what? Good finish, right? And positive relationships, safe, secure, nurturing relationship. If you take away anything tonight, remember SSN. Everybody what? SSN. Safe, secure, nurturing relationships. Positive relationships, provide good foundation. The parent-child relationship is the most powerful mental health intervention known to mankind. And positive studies we've done, lots of studies show that positive relationships are protective. I see Professor Julie Meeks here, they've been involved in a very interesting study, the Jamaican study that was done many years ago. And the lead here was Professor Sally McGregor. And other members of the team are Professor Susan Walker. I think they may all be here. And that became a very popular study. A simple study, which showed that home visitation, this was really done on children who were undernourished, but children who also were exposed to a lot of trauma. Poor nutrition is also traumatic and can lead to toxic stress. And what they did in this study, home visitation, nutritional supplementation, stimulation, just to make to make the point quick. And when they followed up the children 22 years later, they were doing better educationally, they were earning higher, and they were less likely to be involved in crime. Remarkable findings, right? And the famous Jamaican studies, lesson learned, good start, provides a strong foundation, great finish in terms of educational achievement, productivity, responsible citizenship, and long-term health. And this lady reminds us about that. When she gets a good start, it's what? A good what? Finish, right? And that's why these early intervention programs are important. When children get strong start, good finish. And what Professor Meeks reminded me about was that this famous intervention, the Jamaican study, has been replicated in about 16 countries. Not in Jamaica. Even in China, they've replicated it. Not in Jamaica. And so those of us in the university community encourage us, own what we've done and done very well. Early intervention program works, right? There's also the cultural therapy program, which is another early intervention program that was developed by Professor Hicklin. And I only quoted Dr. Guzda here because she had a paper published on it, right? Let me take you to treatment quickly that in the study that we did in terms of the violence against children, what was interesting is that 50% of the children and youth said that they're not able to access service. And that is surprising, right? And we therefore ask ourselves, are our services becoming a pipeline to prison? We're not providing them, yes? Lack of access and inadequate care. We know that those of us who treat children with trauma, it takes them sometimes 6 months, sometimes a year to get into treatment. Yes? And the challenge is a lot of the people involved in care are not, they're doing their best, and I wouldn't knock them, I don't want to berate them, but a lot of people are not adequately trained to what? Deal with trauma. But they do a good job. And so I take us to one of the solutions moving forward, the whole need for us to develop trauma-informed care. It's a concept that recognizes that trauma is common, it affects people's life, and that we need to engage persons more, and that we shouldn't re-traumatize people. And this, I think, highlights what puts trauma-informed care in perspective. That when we see children and persons, we don't ask them what is wrong. We ask what has happened to this child, not what's wrong with this child, because we now understand that trauma can lead to a lot of problems. Right? The 4 components of trauma-informed care, the R's: we must realize impact of trauma, recognize the signs, respond to trauma, and reduce re-traumatization of persons in our systems, right? And I'll skip this one. And so, this is a call for us to, institute trauma-informed care, to apply the components and principles of trauma care in all our systems and programs and practices providing care to children in terms of the clinical health services, social services, human services, and schools, so that we become more aware and sensitized. That is why we really should not be, we need to have a law that bans corporal punishment in schools and harsher laws against corporal punishment in homes, because we're re-traumatizing a lot of children who are exposed to trauma. This is a big one. We need to prioritize childhood trauma, right? That childhood trauma abuse is a public health problem, right? And I don't think we fully recognize this. I know the resources are challenged, and what we do is focus on chronic diseases, but we should also realize that a lot of the chronic diseases are linked to trauma, right? And so our public health system needs to better orientate itself to recognize that we need a more coordinated and integrated approach to trauma. At a societal level, we need to have a greater respect for human life. I think a major part of the problem in this country is that we do not have respect for human life. Yes? The other day I was driving and I heard somebody just casually say, "I'm going to kill you." Right? We say it just easily like that. "I'm going to kill you," because it's how it speaks to the lack of respect for human life. In terms of law and order, the country needs to take a zero-tolerance approach, and we have to deal with the popular culture. All aspects of the popular culture. It's aggressive, it's violent. You know, even some of our cultural icons, and I know I'm going to take a hit for this. We teach children some of the dialect, and it's about cursing people, and some of what they're learning is violent, and you send them to the festival and they get gold medal and we clap them. What is it we're teaching them? To develop these dysfunctional behavior, and we have to address these things in the popular culture and take a zero-tolerance approach to it, yes? And as I come to a close, I have to add to the call for reparation. It's time to repair the harm, right? And you know, the concept of reparation is about acknowledging, apologizing, and making amends. And the amends is not begging for money, you know. In our chain hands, we're not doing that. All we're asking is that persons who have harmed us, right, over the years, right? And I'm glad the Anglican Church, for example, has extended an apology. But they need to make amends, right, to address the years of suffering and poverty of our people, yes? Time for recommendation. And as I come to an end, I just want to make some quick acknowledgements to the many individuals who are here who work and provide care for persons. Give yourself a round of applause. Service providers, government, NGO, Office of Children's Advocate, funding agencies, or international partners, or tertiary institutions that have given us a place and space to work and to research and add to the discussion. And to parents, friends, and community, thank you for listening. And as I come to an end, I just want to remind us, it takes a village to raise a child. Remember, one of the most important things that we can do to protect our children is to provide a safe and healthy relationships and community, right? And for those of us working in care, let's become trauma-informed. Please, after this evening, spread the awareness, right? And if you leave with anything, I want you to remember this. This is a quick quiz. And you answer with one word. The child who is irritable, trauma. Fighting, cutting self, daydreaming, not paying attention, hyperactive, restless, stealing line, running away from home. Think trauma. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's all trauma, but think about that, right? And as we end, I just want us all to just consider this message from a little boy. If I were born with all my knowledge at birth, I would have said to my parents something like this: push, don't shove, talk, don't scream, teach, don't lecture, hold me, don't pull me, guide, don't take my place. Lastly, love me without measure. And for those of us who carry our trauma and pain buried in our bodies and brains, covered by silence and shame, when we heal our trauma, we break the pattern for the next generation. That's our work. That's our gift to the next generation. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Not an easy road. And many see the glamour and the glitter, so them think I pay the rose. Me say, who feels he knows? Woo, 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 Lord, help me sustain. From the minute of birth, you enter this earth, obstacle there in your way to overcome first. Throughout every day, it seems to get worse. Oh my Lord, cast away this curse. Everybody a try to make every enemy through every way that they endeavor. Lord God, you see it. No matter what the world may say out the street, most of us survive, won't accept defeat. Now I'm weary,
Abel, thank
tired
you so
and
much.
dreary.
That was excellent, engaging, memorable. What you were just hearing was one of our students, Justin Smith. He was the 2024 GraceKennedy Edna Manley College Scholar for that year, and he was singing "It's Not an Easy Road," underlining what Professor Abel had said. At this time, we're going to be taking some questions from Slido. Now, I have to tell you that there are already about 40 questions on the list. So I'm going to be selecting some and look at the ones that are most highly ranked, and I will just answer some of them that are more statements than questions. Very early, from you were just starting, Prof. Abel, we were being asked, where can you go to get help if you're suffering from trauma? Are there free services? Your time.
I see the director of Child Adolescent Service here, Dr. Leiber, from the Ministry of Health. But, you know, the truth is, we have mental health services available in most parish hospitals island-wide. And also we have a network of health centers island-wide. There are about 300, health centers, and in about, over 100, well, probably 150, we offer mental health services. And we also have a network of child guidance clinics island-wide. But the reality is, despite the services we have, they're not adequate. Part of the challenge is that we don't have enough psychologists, we don't have enough social workers, especially those with clinical with clinical training. We don't have counselors with specialized training to do therapy. So there's a challenge. And as I said earlier, that a lot of children have a long wait before they can access care. And even so, the reality is that for trauma therapy is very intensive work. It takes highly trained persons to be able to do that. And so we do have a challenge. I wish I could give an easier answer, but I'm sounding like an academic at the university who probably take a long time to get to the point that says that we don't have, the services are not adequate, and we clearly need to strengthen these services.
No, I think that is what we need to hear. So just a reminder for those of you who want to ask a question, you go to your program and click to submit question. You can scan the QR code. I wonder if they can put it back up for us. The ushers are walking around with QR codes to scan. Another person had been asking if this lecture is going to be available, and it will be available on YouTube, on the GraceKennedy YouTube channel, so you can watch it again or watch it for the first time if you haven't seen it before. There were some points noted here that said there are people who have done work dealing with trauma, including Dr. Elizabeth Ward from the Violence Prevention Alliance and Dr. Maureen Sams-Vaughan. I know you mentioned some of her work, and I'm just acknowledging that that was also mentioned here. For some reason, here we go. My questions disappeared, but they are back. Do we restructure the question and our approach to reforming deviant adults in society, as Prof. Abel suggested, with what has happened to that adult? Wonder if you'd like to answer that.
Well, as I said, the reality is that nowadays we're asked to take a more trauma-informed approach in terms of how we deal with individuals, because to recognize that trauma is common, that a lot of the problematic behavior we may be seeing may actually be, a lot of it is actually trauma related. In fact, our colleague, I think it's Dr. Gale, who often tell us that when you look at the trauma data, the violence data, young males are not only themselves victims, but they're also perpetrators, yes? That people who don't cut from what, heal from what hurt them, they're going to bleed on other persons who didn't cut them. And this is what we're seeing in the society. So we need to recognize that a lot of the problems we're having, every discussion on trauma and abuse is going to take us back to violence and criminality in Jamaica, because it's such a major problem, right? It's our number one, a major public health issue for us. And what we're saying, when we encounter people with difficult personalities, perpetrators of violence and crime, it's a question we have to ask: what is happening to them? What has happened to them? And invariably, in many instances, it's going to take us back to trauma.
So the answer is yes.
It's yes, long
for
way
adults
again.
as well as for children. What has happened to this person? Another very popular question here. A traumatized person decides to open up to a person who is unqualified to assist them. What advice can you give to the hearer to first be able to help and also not be emotionally affected?
Well, one of the first things is that when you're dealing with, when you're doing trauma work, you have to make sure you're properly trained, yes? Because, and to ensure that you're not judgmental and that you're not re-traumatizing people. Sometimes it can happen unknowingly. In fact, I remember I often tell this story. One night I was doing therapy and I yawned. And it wasn't that I was sleeping, it was just a short, yes. And
yawns are involuntary.
Yes, and the individual just started to cry. And I said, but something is happening here. And when I asked the person, what is happening? The person said to me, when you yawn, you make me feel that I'm no good, I'm worthless. And this is how I grew up in my home. I was told that I'm no good, I'm worthless, I'm not going to come out to be anybody. And so quickly I had to realize that I had to, out of this experience, this therapeutic encounter, I had to actually work it through now and realize that I'm dealing with somebody who actually is traumatized, poor self-esteem, poor self-worth, to the extent that a yawn could be interpreted as I'm not good enough, I'm not worthwhile. And so you have to be skilled to be able to deal with trauma and handle trauma.
Admittedly, but what the person was saying was, if somebody comes to you and
Yes.
you are not trained,
Yes.
do you just turn them back, or what can you do?
You really should, if boy, it's a difficult one because
hard.
we don't have a lot of trained persons around. But ideally, if you're not trained, you really shouldn't be practicing the craft, because a lot of times, not a lot of times, most of the times, you're going to do more harm than good. Okay. And one of the basic principles in ethics is that we should do no harm.
No harm.
Yes? So if you're not trained, don't take it on.
I hear you. And anybody who was coming to me crying on my shoulder, that is going to be my new response. I'm not trained. No, I'm not making light of it, but it is an issue. You want to help. So better to just listen, be non-judgmental, and recommend professionals.
Yes, the best thing we can do on a daily basis is just to listen and to be non-judgmental, but to refer when we realize that it's bigger than us, it's deeper than us. But remember, for the children, remember, we can, that's what safe, stable, what? Nurturing relationship.
Safe, stable, nurturing.
In our everyday activity, in how we relate to children at church, in our community, can be very impactful. That's probably one of the best medicine for trauma and to prevent long-term damage from trauma.
Thank you. Dr. Clayton Sewell wrote a question that has had 12 likes. What are your thoughts on military-styled interventions being used to manage the behavioral issues associated with vulnerable youth?
Dr. Sewell is my boss. You know.
Be careful.
So I have to answer it properly. But as you know, a lot of military-style interventions, they really don't work. They really have not been shown to be useful and effective, right? And in fact, a lot of times they're actually re-traumatizing. Yes? That our approach to dealing with trauma must be trauma-informed. Trauma-informed approach in terms of our care, to recognize that trauma is common. We must be able to recognize the signs and the symptoms of trauma, but we also must ensure that we don't want to re-traumatize people. And it's really that whatever intervention, therapeutic intervention we have, must follow the science, and it must be evidence-based. But the military style work doesn't work. In fact, I tell you this, I mean, you look at persons who've been to war and who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, they've had to develop very comprehensive trauma therapy to deal with these individuals. They don't put them in a military camp. No, because they know that it can also be re-traumatizing for individuals. So I hope I answered that question.
Yes, I think that was well done. Erica Martin wrote, and this again...
But I'll tell you before you go on, I know Dr. Sewell's question is veiled, you know. Right? he's a whole mirror like myself. And he probably might be asking in terms of approaches that we may be looking at in Jamaica and people are advocating for. Sure. It doesn't work. These methods are re-traumatizing and we must avoid them. Yes? Whatever we do, we must follow the evidence and follow the science.
I think that there is a feeling that the military is very disciplined and disciplining, and therefore, if you are saying that a lot of the issues have to do with indiscipline, you want them in a disciplined situation. But it is different from trauma.
It's different from, yeah, absolutely. Structure and so on is helpful, you know, but, and you know, the truth also is that one size doesn't fit all. I mean, you know, I must also say in terms of approaches in life, we have to realize that there are many approaches that we can use, but whatever approach we use must be non-judgmental. It must be based on love and support and care, and must not be re-traumatizing. But you were going to go on to another question.
Yes, there was an Erica Martin. Thank you for your question, which is also very popular with 9 likes. How can persons identify patterns of behavior that stem from their childhood trauma? Self-recognition.
Well, firstly, one of them is that there's an exposure to trauma. That's the first one, yes? The exposure to trauma. But in terms of the patterns of behavior, that's a difficult, a long question, but I'll go through it quickly. It starts with your thinking, yes? People who are traumatized a lot of times end up with very negative self-concept. I'm not good enough, I'm unworthy, I'm not loved. They also end up feeling that the world is not a safe place and that people around them cannot be trusted because the adults in their lives, if you're a child who was exposed to a lot of trauma, you're going to blame the adults because the adults in our lives are supposed to be there to protect us, yes? And what trauma does is that it shatters your assumptive world, yes? The world is supposed to be a safe place. The adults are supposed to protect us, but they didn't, yes? So you lose faith in the adults. If you lose faith in your world, you sometimes even see the future as being hopeless. And of course, that is going to lead to persistent feelings of sadness and depression and so on. And if you followed in the lecture, you realize that one of the end result of trauma is that your behavior, you may indulge in a lot of self-harming behavior, risky behavior, high-risk sexual patterns of behavior and self-harming behavior like substance abuse and so on, you know? So it's at the cognitive how you think, it's at the feeling level, and it's at the behavioral level how you behave. And a lot of people with trauma have difficulty with their interpersonal relationship. It's very difficult for them to trust people and have stable relationship because they did not have that in their lives.
Yes, and you live what you learn.
You live what you learn.
Dr. Cheryl Thompson has written, restitution is an important step in the treatment of trauma survivors. How should clinicians address restitution in their treatment?
Well, you know, the restitution is embodied in the whole business of justice. In fact, when I talked about reparative justice, it's about repairing the harm. And the three underpinning is that the 3 A's, you should acknowledge the harm, right? You should apologize and you make amends. And in many settings, you know, it might be there are times when it's not possible all the time, but in certain type of trauma work, you may actually bring the victim and the offender together and to be able to have the person at an individual level just to acknowledge the harm, to be able to apologize and make some form of amends, right? But in therapy, we kind of try to simulate that process as best as possible because the therapist sits there as a witness bystander, right? Listening to your narrative and acknowledging the harm and to help you to work through the process. But sometimes it's difficult to go through that process in an individual sort of setting. But these techniques, you know, have been used in societies where they've had people have suffered great harm. For example, in South Africa and Rwanda, you know, where they had their truth and reconciliation process. And the underpinning of that has been the 3 A's, acknowledging the harm, apologizing, and making amends. And so what the point I'm making, it can be done at a group level, but it can also be done sometimes at an individual level when it's possible.
So I know that is a popular methodology for a legal kind of issue.
Yes, in restorative.
So restorative justice.
Justice, yes.
But they were asking about it in terms of a clinical situation. So
It's sometimes it can be done, but you see, you sometimes, as best as possible, you may be able to simulate that sort of process. But there are other techniques that we employ in specific therapeutic settings. And I realize a lot of the questions are very clinical.
They are very clinical, and I'm going to actually ask you a question now that does not have to do with the clinical situation. There is a case in the news today of an 11-year-old who was abusing a 6-year-old girl. And the anonymous question has a number of likes, but they were asking, what are the possible causes and possible interventions in a case like this? Would you like to address that?
I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because I know it's before the court, but and I don't know the specifics of the situation, except to say that children live what they learn, right, and what they see on a daily basis, and it just speaks to the overexposure the fact that the society is an over-sexualized society, overexposed to violence and so on, and that really we need to bring up our children to be able to behave in age-appropriate ways, you know, and it's obviously is a failure
of the village.
The village. That's the best way to say it. It's a village, meaning all of us, because we have to take shared responsibility in terms of our village.
So we are actually out of time for the questions, and you really have been very patient with us for after your lecture, taking so many questions. And thank you for everyone who submitted your questions on Slido. I'm now going to invite Mrs. Caroline Mafood, our foundation CEO, to the stage for some special presentations. Excuse me.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I hope I don't know if I can say enjoyed the lecture because it's so intense, but I think we've all learned a great deal. Thank you so much, Prof. Appreciate it. Move the chairs back. So I know you're all hungry, and we are going to be serving refreshments outside, but before we close, and we will have a vote of thanks, so I'm going to ask you to hold on for that too. We really want to thank Prof. Abel for an outstanding lecture, and we would like to present him with a framed copy of the book cover for today's lecture. And I would like to ask Professor Gordon Shirley, chairman of our GraceKennedy board, to join us. I'm going to ask the chairman of our board, the GraceKennedy Foundation board, Dr. Fred Kennedy, also. Prof, you are going to. And I'm also going to ask Mrs. Grace, why am I going blank? Burnett, come forward, who is standing in for our group CEO today. I'm going to ask you to come on stage here, please. No, and Julia, you're actually to join us as well. 1 second, Prof. You can go on. Yes, please. Again, thank you so much for an outstanding lecture. Please just all of you stay there for one more minute. And as you know, Prof mentioned at the beginning that Pauline Milburn, Dr. Pauline Milburn, he dedicated the lecture to her. And, pardon? And we wanted, I don't know if you know this, but he mentioned it earlier. She was our 2003 lecturer. And her contribution to national development, we can't even list off here right now, but we'd love for you to come forward because we also want to make a presentation to you as well. Very exciting to see her protege presenting and passing on the baton in this way as well. And you can come in the middle here. Yes. And I'm going to...
We're almost there, everybody. Before we conclude, though, we're kindly asking all attendees to take a few moments to complete our brief post-lecture survey. Your feedback is really extremely valuable to us, and it will help us improve future events. So you can access the survey from the link on your digital program or the QR code on the screen. And for virtual attendees, we have also dropped the link in the YouTube chat box. So please take a moment now to scan the QR code and click the link provided. So you're going to have a couple of minutes to do that.
Got no time to waste, you better know now. It's not an easy road. How many see the glamour and the glitter, so them think a better rose. Me say, who feels it knows. Whoa, 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 Lord help me sustain these blows. And yeah, not an easy road. How many see the glamour and the glitter, so them think a better rose. Me say, who feels it knows. Whoa, 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 Lord help me sustain. Not an easy road, and many see the glamour and the glitter, so them think a better rose. Me say, who feels it knows. Whoa, 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 Lord help me sustain these blows. Aye, not an easy road, and many see the glamour and the glitter, so them think a better rose. Me say, who feels it knows. Whoa, 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 Lord help me sustain. From the minute of birth, you enter this earth, obstacle there in your way to overcome first. Throughout every day, it seemed to get worse. Oh my Lord, cast away this curse. Everybody I try to make every enemy through every way that they endeavor.
It is my honor to introduce
Lord God,
Mrs.
you see.
Terry-Ann Gravel to deliver the vote of thanks. Terry-Ann is the Chief Operating Officer of First Global Bank and the Director of the GraceKennedy Foundation, serving on both the Finance and Education Committees. Please join me in welcoming Terry-Ann to the stage.
I hate to be the one to stand between you and dinner. Her Excellency, the Most Honorable Lady Allen, representing His Excellency Sir Patrick Allen, Governor General of Jamaica. Distinguished guests, I will follow our chairman's comments. All protocols observed. Good night. On behalf of the Lecture Committee of the GraceKennedy Foundation, I extend our heartfelt gratitude to all those who contributed to making this evening's lecture a success. Our deepest thanks to our distinguished lecturer, Professor the Honorable Wendel Abel, for his thought-provoking and insightful discussion on childhood trauma. Your presentation has provided us with valuable perspectives on this critical issue, and some thoughts left with me: safe, secure, nurturing, strong start equals a good finish. Don't ask what is wrong, but what has happened to that child, and we need to address what is happening with our popular culture. The seamless execution of an event like this requires meticulous planning, dedication, and teamwork. We extend our appreciation to the following individuals and organizations: Charmaine Mackenzie, our editor, who dedicated countless hours working with Professor Abel to produce an outstanding lecture ebook. Charmaine, we are truly grateful for your commitment. Maxine McDonough, our public relations consultant, whose efforts helped to promote and ensure the success of this event. Ryan Scott, CEO Highlight SP, forgive me if I mispronounce the name, our visual communicator and a former GKF Edna Manley scholar who designed all the online and print media materials, created the graphics for the lecture book, and captured today's event through photography. Thank you, Ryan. The UA Regional Headquarters team for their warm hospitality and assistance. Craig Grant, who transformed the space with beautiful decor, creating the perfect ambiance for this evening. Mark White and his team from Visual Tech Solutions for providing excellent audiovisual support and live streaming. Abraham Aiken and Danae Campbell, our sign language interpreters, for ensuring accessibility and inclusivity for all participants. Justin Smith, our 2025 Edna Manley Scholar, who delivered a soulful rendition of Buju Banton's Not an Easy Road. Thanks for that, Justin. The GraceKennedy Corporate Communications team for their unwavering support. To our GraceKennedy board, our GraceKennedy Foundation board, your guidance and support are invaluable. A special thank you to our vice chair, Professor Julie Meeks Gardner, who expertly guided us through the program and as our master of ceremonies. Of course, we have support from our GraceKennedy board, our chairman, our executive team from GraceKennedy. Thank you for being here and also offering your support. To the GraceKennedy Foundation team, Marjorie and Crystal and the rest of the team, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure every detail was attended to. Thank you for your dedication. Finally, to each and every one of you, our audience, both in person and online, thank you for joining us, engaging in this important discussion, and contributing to the energy. I don't want to say vibrancy. It was quite intense, as Caroline said, of the evening. We invite you to access the lecture book available free of charge on the GraceKennedy website. And please rewatch the lecture on GraceKennedy's YouTube channel at your convenience. Before I release you, let me see the hands of those who completed the post-lecture survey. Awesome. You deserve your dinner. If you haven't yet done so, please complete it before leaving, as your feedback is invaluable in helping us to improve our future events. Please join us for refreshments outside. Thank you all, and have a wonderful evening.